Hello everyone, welcome to episode. My name is Amit, and today we are going to see this role-based Spring Security within database. In that video, we are going to use Spring Security latest version called as a 6.0 plus and latest version of the Spring Boot called as 3.0 plus. So here we are not going to just understand the syntaxes or not going to learn the syntaxes only, but we are going to learn here internal flow of the Spring Security, because my thought is without understanding the internal flow of the Spring Security you will not able to understand anything apart from the syntaxes. That syntax you will get on the internet. Okay, so it is very important to get the expertise into the Spring Security. You should know about the internal flow of the Spring Security. So let's start with the internals of the Spring Security. So before we start, so please share and subscribe this channel and do the comments. So by looking your comment, I will get a motivation and I will add more videos for you. Okay, so let's start with the internals of the Spring Security. So let's see internals of the Spring Security. Let's say we have slash hello API and user wants to access this API. So when he hit first time that API, then that request will get intercepted by the filters. So basically, before reaching that request to our application, it will get intercepted by the filters. So there are a bunch of filters provided by the Spring Security. Then what is the role of developer here? So here, developer is not capable to configure these all filters. So Spring Security is telling to us, don't worry, you have to just configure Spring Security filter chain. Okay, security filter chain bean. So basically this is the interface and it has an implementation. So we have to create a security filter chain bean. While creating this bean, we have to provide some inputs. For example, what kind of APIs that we want to secure, or what should be the login page. It should be custom or default login page. So such kind of inputs that we have to provide into the while creating the security filter chain. Once we provide these inputs, then only we can able to create a object of security filter chain or bean of security filter chain. Once we created security filter chain, then security filter chain is responsible for to decide, okay, that slash hello is secured resource or not secured resource, because we already configure. And while configuring security filter chain internally, uh, that chain is responsible for to configure bunch of filters. So the conclusion is security filter chain is not a filter, it's a interface which has implementation, and it is responsible for to configure bunch of filters. So basically it is a combination of filters which is playing most important role while doing the authentication. Okay, so here we hit that API slash hello. Okay, then security filter chain take a decision, or we already configured that API. Okay, slash hello is a secured API. If it is secured API, then after this security filter chain will pass this request toward the login page. Okay, whether it is custom or uh, default login page. If we configured custom, then it will pass toward the custom. Otherwise, it select the default login page. Once it is passed to the default login page, then user has to provide the username password, and he has to click on the login. When he click on the login button, again that username password will get to the security filter chain. Now here that filter is responsible for to extract the username and password, and by using that username password he creates one object called as a authentication object. So basically this is a class, and inside that class that filter is responsible for to put or set that username password. Now once that authentication object is ready, so this authentication object will provide it or will provide by the filter to the authentication manager. And here authentication manager plays very important role. Okay, basically it is a class or interface which has implementation, so don't worry about it. Each and everything here is a class, object and interface. So that security filter chain calls authentication manager method and pass this authentication object, which contains username password basically. So here, authentication manager responsibility is, um, he fetch or he get the username from that authentication object, and after this, after getting the username, he call to the database. Okay, he calls to the database, and from database he get the user detail based on the username. Let's say username is a avsort, then a authentication manager will call to the database and he fetch that user object. Okay, user object based on the username, but he will not call directly to the database. He is using one standard interface called as a user detail service provided by the Spring Security, and which has one abstract method called as a load by username. Okay, so basically here developer has to provide the implementation to that user detail service. Okay, and inside that implementation we have to write logic to get the data or get the user object from the user table. Okay, by their username. So find by username, that query that we will need. Okay, we will need the find by username query. So that user detail service go to the database and find and or get the object of user, find by username, and once he get the object of the user, then it returns that object, user detail object, or I can say user object, to the authentication manager. Once that authentication manager received that user object, which has username, password, and role, okay, actual username, password, and role, then after this, we can see that he has two things. One is a authentication object. Okay, he's getting that object or details from the user, from the browser, and he has username, password, and role from the database. Okay, so he has two objects. So once he get the two objects, then he has to choose the authentication manager. Sorry, it's my bad. It has to choose authentication provider. So what is authentication provider here? Okay, so let me tell you. Okay, so authentication provider is an interface which has multiple implementations, Okay, you can see there are multiple implementation called as DAO authentication provider, JWT authentication provider, LTAP authentication provider, and OAuth2, CAS, and OpenID. So what are those implementations? Let me clear you. If you want to apply the security based on the database, then you have to choose DAO authentication provider. If you want to provide the security based on the JWT token, then you have to choose this implementation. For LTAP, this implementation. For OAuth2 serve, OAuth2 provider, OAuth2 authentication, you have to choose this. Basically, if you see on many of the websites, log in with the Google or log in with the Facebook. So if you want to do that thing, so you can go for this. And if you want to single sign on, then you can go for a cache authentication provider. Okay, so today we are going to see database authentication. Okay, database authentication or database level security. So we will use here DAO authentication provider. Okay, DAO authentication provider. So what happened here basically, uh, if you want to provide DAO authentication provider, then we have to create a bean of DAO authentication provider, and then we need to uh, provide this bean to the authentication manager, or we need to configure authentication manager with the bean or with the authentication provider. That means this authentication manager or developer has to configure this authentication manager to choose the authentication provider. So I want DAO authentication provider, so that's it. We have to configure this authentication manager with the this provider. So after this, what happen? Once we configure this manager with this provider, so after this, manager has that user object and authentication object. So he pass these objects, both objects, to the DAO authentication provider, and this provider is responsible for to validate, okay, or to provide the authentication. For example, he has an authentication object which has username, password, and that user object which has username password rule. So he cross check, okay, it is matching or not, or it is valid or not. If it is valid, after this it return, or it set one flag, or we can say that it adds some information into the authentication object. Who? That provided. What information he added? He added that information key, this user is authenticated or authorized. Okay, so he set the one flag or provide one information into that object. Okay, this object or this user is valid user. Once he set the data inside the authentication object that user is valid, so after this, that authentication provide return this authentication object to the authentication manager. Okay, so here authentication manager has this object which has information of the user with the information that this user is a valid user. Once that authentication manager received this object which contains uh, information about the valid user, okay, so authentication manager provide this object, authentication object, to the security filter chain or filter. Now there are multiple filters, those are responsible for to perform these all operations. Okay, so here what happens, see, once that filter received that authentication object, so filter get to know, okay, this is a valid user, this is the valid user. So after this, he create one security context or security context holder. Inside that security context holder, he put that, or he creates again new object called as a security context, and he store that authentication object inside the security context. Okay, so what is the use or what is the purpose to store that object inside the security context? I will tell you, don't worry. Okay, so here the next stage is, after creating the security context holder and putting the security context object, and inside that putting the authentication object, it creates one session. It creates one session. Many of you heard about the session, something user sessions like this. Okay, so this is the session. Basically, this is the object. Okay, this is the object. It creates that object which have one ID. Okay, as let's say SID, and inside that session object, it copy this security context, okay, into that session ID with that authentication or authentication object. Okay, authentication object. Now the next thing is once it create a session with session ID and security context object, inside this there is a session that authentication object, it return that SID to the user. Okay, it also return that SID to the user. Now user means that browser, okay, client, and that client store that SID inside the browser, okay, inside the cookies basically. Okay, same SID into the cookies. Now but before this, once he create the sessions, okay, and filter knows this is the valid user. Okay, so after this it will allow that request to access the hello API first time. Now once that request is completed, after this what it will do, it will remove that security context from the that context holder. Now when user calls second time to the same API, or any other API, call second time to our application, so this time that browser sends session ID with the HTTP request. Okay, so request is there, but with that request there is a session ID. Okay, same session ID. So once that session ID received this filter, filter will check, okay, for that session ID, is there any session available, is there any session object available into the server? Yes, there is a session whose ID is matching with this request session ID. If it is matching, then security filter chain copy this security context object and paste into the security context holder with that authentication object, and then it allows that HTTP request to access the API. So basically this is the Spring security flow. Now today we are going to see that DAO authentication provider. Basically this is database level security. If tomorrow you want to apply JWT authentication provider, then you need to configure this into the code. Okay, but what happen if you are not configuring authentication manager in the code? So inbuilt or by default, Spring is responsible for to configure authentication manager if you are not configuring, and it will choose by default DAO authentication provider. That means database level security. Now there is one another case. In that case, if user send invalid password or username, then what happen? So let's see first if he's sending the wrong or invalid username, what happened here. So let's say user is hitting hello/hello API, and that will get intercepted by the filter, and filter divert this request toward the login page. He provide here wrong username and password, let's say, and click on the login, and then again that request will go to the security filter chain. Here the filter extract the username password and create the authentication object. He pass this authentication object to the authentication manager. Authentication manager get the username from that authentication object and try to get the data from the database for that username. So he tried to get the user object from the database, but he will not get that data from the database because of invalid username. So in that case, it will throw an exception, let's say called as invalid user, and this exception will get to the filter chain, and that filter chain do the exception handling and return, or again divert that request toward the login page if it has a wrong username. Okay, let's say if it has a wrong passwords, then what happen? Then again he click on the login page, it goes to the filter chain, filter extract the username password, create an authentication object, send that authentication object to the authentication manager. Then that authentication manager extract the username, go to the database using the user detail service, fetch the user, because this time username is valid, so he will get the user object from the database. Then this user object and that authentication object he sends to the authentication provider. Authentication provider validate that user object and authentication object, and then he find that okay, that password is wrong. In that case, he sends, or um, he throw an exception called as a invalid password. Okay, so I don't remember exact name of the exception, but kind of exception is there. So he sends or he throw exceptions called as a invalid password. Then that password, that exception will get propagate to the authentication manager. Again, authentication manager throw that exception toward the filter chain, and here that filter chain see that exception, and again that filter is responsible for to divert that request, or divert to user toward the login page, and ask him to log in again because user password was wrong. So in that way that internals of security or Spring Security is working. So let's jump onto the code. But before jumping onto the code, let me tell you one thing. In today's session, we are going to see DAO authentication provider or DB level security. In next sessions or next video, I will create video on the JWT, OAuth2 or LLTab or OpenID on the various authentication provider. But for this, please share and subscribe this video, and please provide the likes and do the comments. So from your comments, I will get the motivation and I will create a multiple videos on the Spring Security or on the Spring Boot. So let's jump onto the code without wasting the time. So let's create a Spring Boot application. So here we have selected 3.3.1 Spring Boot application. Okay, and product name, let's say artifact, let's say security security demo. Okay, security demo DB. That is it. Security demo DB. Now the next thing is add a dependency. So we need a here security. Okay, security Spring security dependency. The next thing is that we need it called as web. Okay, then we need Postgres. Okay, because we are using here Postgres database, and then which one? Spring data JPA. Okay, data JPA. That's it. So we need this dependency, and let's create a project. Okay, what it is asking? Okay, so we have Spring Security, Spring Web, Postgres driver, and Spring Data GPA. Okay, we are good. So generate the project. So project is generated. So let's open the project, extract this project. project is extracted, and now the next thing is import this project. Okay, so here our project is imported. Now the next thing is we have to create one REST controller. So to save the time, I already created one controller where there are two APIs. One is hello user and hello admin. Okay, so basically this I want to provide the access of the to the admin for the both APIs, and for user can access only this API. Okay, so this is already created to save the time. The next thing is we have to create the entity. Okay, entity. So basically we have to store the information of user, including username, password, and role inside the database. Okay, so for that, what I can do, I'm creating the class, and my class name or entity name is called as a user. Why I'm taking my user, not user? There is one reason, because already there is a class called as a user in present inside the security. Okay, Spring Security, and the thing is you will get confused. Okay, that our user and that Spring Security user, so that's why I'm taking my user. So this is already I copied. Okay, so you can see we have the entity called as my user, and which has ID. Okay, then username, password, and roles. Okay, roles. So here I'm taking string roles. Okay, comma separated roles. You can create a different class called as role, and you can provide the many to many mapping. That means one user can have multiple roles, and one roles can have multiple users. But to save the times, I am taking here string roles, where I will provide a comma separated roles. Okay, so I think we are good here: username, password, and roles. Now the next thing is we have to create a repository. So right click, new package called as let's say repo. Okay, repo, and then we have to create a new class, or sorry, interface name. Her name is called my user repository. Okay, repo, let's say, and extend from jpa repository. Okay, jpa repository, and here provide the class name called as my user, and then id called as let's say long. Okay, long is a id. That's it. Now our repository is ready. Now the next thing is in application.properties, we need to provide some properties. Okay, so let me copy from another application.properties. Okay, so okay, I have handy here. Then close this, and I have to paste here. So currently we are using Postgres database. Username and password I have given. So this is the properties for it, Postgres. Okay, if you are using any other database, no worries, but you have to change these properties. If you don't know, let me know in the comment. I will provide another database properties. So basically, you have to copy and paste into the application.property. So our database configurations are ready. Now what else? Okay, what else here? So let me open the controller. Okay, so we have two APIs. Now the next thing is we have to provide the configurations. Okay, now after this I want to, or we have to create a security config package. Okay, we have already discussed about that security config package. If you don't know, so please go through previous video, you will get to know the idea. Okay, so here we have to provide config package or security or config. Okay, let's say config package. Inside this we have to provide a Spring Security config. Okay, so create a class name is, you can give any name, but it should be meaningful. Okay, so I am giving here security config. Okay, security config, that's it. And here provide the annotation called as @configuration, not configuration configurable, it should be configuration, that's it. Now the next thing is as we discussed in our that implementation. Okay, in the implementation where it is. Okay, so here we have discussed that we have to configure a security filter chain. Okay, so let's configure security filter chain or create a bean of security. Basically, we are not we are configuring the bean of security filter chain. So for that, create a method public return type is security filter. Okay, filter chain, and method name is let's say security filter chain. Okay, http security. Okay, http security, that's it. And we have to, as I told you, we have to declare here bean, because we are creating the security filter chain bean. So here we have, so let's configure that security filter chain. And here we are creating the bean of security filter chain and or object of security filter chain. And in that case, we have to provide some configurations. For example, HTTP security dot authorized HTTP request. Inside that, provide implementation. Let's say auth arrow and auth dot request matcher. Request matcher means the we have to provide here basically URL. Okay, for this URL I want a security. Okay, slash hello admin. Okay, hello admin. And then after this, let's say I want to provide uh, access to admin only. Okay, I want to provide access to that URL to the admin only. So for that, dot has role. Okay, has role. Inside the role, we have to provide the role. Let's say for this API, only admin can access. So let's say admin. That's it. Okay. So here provide any request, small any request. Okay. That's it. And then enter here. So let me take it on next line. So has role admin and then authenticated. Okay. Authenticated. That's it. That means every request to be authenticated. That's it. So this is the configurations that we have did here for the hello admin. Okay, so here hello admin API accessed only by the admin role. Okay, admin role. That's it. So after authentication, the next thing is that we needed called as a we have to provide the login method. Okay, so whether it is custom login or default login or form login, whatever. So here we have to go. Okay, we have to go with form login. Okay, so dot form login, then in bracket again form. Okay, login arrow, then form login dot permit all. That means every request that should be diverted to the form. Okay, so everyone can, any request can access that login form. Okay, so after this I think this is okay, but let's provide for the logout. Okay, so dot logout. Inside this again provide the implementation, so any request can access this logout button. Okay, or logout things. Logout lg is equal to lg dot permit all. That's it. So our Spring Security, what happened here? Okay, it is asking to throw an exception, so throw the exception. Okay, now the thing is our configuration is done, and we are here we have configured that if hello admin, if someone is calling hello admin, then it has to that user has the admin role, then only he can able to access. Now the next thing is any request authenticated, so each and every request will get authenticated. That's it. So this is the configuration of the security filter chain, but we haven't created the object of security filter chain with that configuration. So basically this is the configuration, this is the configuration. And now dot build, when you call build, then it will return implementation of the security filter chain. That's it. So it return the object of security filter chain. So we have created the bean here. Now we are good with the security filter chain. Now the next thing is, as I said, we have to configure the user detail service. To configure user detail service bean, we need to write a method. Okay, public, then user detail service. Okay, user detail service, and then user detail service. Method name is also same. And the next thing is we need to configure or we need to create a user detail service. So basically, bean annotation should be there. The next thing is, if you see user detail service is the interface which has method called as load user by name. So this is an abstract interface. Sorry, this is a functional interface. So to the functional interface, we can provide the implementation using the lambda expression. Okay, using the lambda expression. Now here, if you see, this method will get called by the authentication manager. He passed the username, and based on that username, we have to get the data or get the user detail from the database. Okay, so let's provide the implementation to that method. So what we can do that user detail service. Okay, user detail service is equal to bracket. Okay, bracket, inside the bracket, let's say username. Okay, username, then arrow. Okay, in bracket again we have to write a logic. We have to write a logic to get the data from the database. But to get the data from that user table, my user table, so what we have to do here, we have to auto wire that my user details repo. Okay, my user repo, my user repo. Okay, my user repo, that's it. Now the next thing is, so let's provide the implementation here. Now we are using the lambda expression to provide the implementation to that load method. Okay, load by username method. So what we can do here, first we have to call, or first we have to fetch the data from the database based on the username. So for this we have to use this method, sorry, this repository. If you see inside this repository, this is the method. Okay, this is the method. Now call this method, and you have to add this method compulsorily. Now what we can do, my repository, okay, dot find by user, find by username. Okay, find by username, that's it. And pass this username. Which one? This one. Once we pass this username, then it will return the my user object. Okay, so from that object what we can do, dot map. Okay, so basically map this object to the user detail object, sorry, user object. So here what we are going to do, we are fetching the data or that my user object from the database, which contain username, password, and roles, and all data we are setting inside the user object. Okay, user object. So which user object is this? This user object. Okay, okay, so let me show you which user object is this. So this is this user detail object. Okay, so we are creating here user detail object by getting the data from the database, and all the data will get set inside this user detail object. So let's jump onto the code again. Okay, then after this map, inside the map what we can do, user or my user object arrow, and then set the user object. So this user object coming from Spring. Okay, and then build this object. Build means we are setting the data. Okay, builder this object dot username. Now where we will get the username, inside the my user object. So take the username from this my user object, get username. Now the next thing is that what we needed here, we need dot password. So where we will get the password, inside this my user object. So get the password from that my user, get password. Now the what is missing here, roles. Okay, roles. So what we can do, dot roles. Now we will get the roles in form of string, comma separated string, but this user object accepting the role in form of list. So convert that comma separated string into the list of roles. Okay, so what we can do here, my user dot get roles. Okay, get roles dot split. Okay, split, yes, split by comma. Okay, by comma. Now that's it, we are good here. Okay, so what we did, what is missing here, my user dot get split. Okay, now we are good. Okay, after this what we can do, call dot build method. Now once we call this build method, that means that object called as a user object, okay, that user detail object is created. Okay, is created when we call build method with the username and password and roles. Okay, now here we are good. Then after this what we have to do, dot throw. Okay, else throw. So basically what is the else throw? That means if that username is not exist, then throw an exception. Show you throw. Okay, so here what we are doing, throw, if that username is not present in the database, okay, then throw an exception, user not found exception. That's it, we are good here. Okay, the next thing is remove this and then the return. Okay, return you. That's it. So our user detail service is ready. Let me revise these things again. So what we did here, so basically we provide the implementation to that user detail service interface load by username method. Okay, and here when that authentication manager pass the username to that method, then that method is responsible for to get the data from the database, and it retrieve or it fetch the my user object, and from that my user object it is creating the user object. Okay, it is creating the user object, and in that user object it is setting username, password, and roles. Once this user object is ready, okay, ready, then it is creating user detail service by calling the build method. Once that user detail service is ready, then we are returning this u. Now that authentication manager will get this u, and from that u it will retrieve that user detail object, okay, which we have seen inside this diagram. Okay, let me show you again. So here you can see authentication manager call to the load by username method. He passed the username. Based on username, user detail service return the user detail object. Once that authentication manager will have user detail object and authentication object, then it sends to the DAO authentication provider. So now let's configure that authentication manager here. Okay, so let's configure the bean of authentication provider or manager. But as I said, if you want to perform the database level security, then we need to configure that DAO authentication provider and with the authentication manager. But if you are not configuring, then by default, Spring Security will configure this at their side. We don't need to create a bean. That bean will get created automatically for only database level security. But in case of OAuth or another custom security, then we can go for that authentication manager and provider. So here we don't need to do anything here. That's it. Okay. But apart from this, we need another thing called as password encoder. So basically, password encoder is something when we store data inside the database. While storing that user detail, we have to encrypt that password. So we will use this bean to store that password into the database. Okay, that's it. Now let's see. Okay, the next thing, our security config class is ready. Now the next thing is we want to set the username, password, and roles into the database. Okay, so for that, as you know, we have already one entity called as my user. Okay, so this table should be in database. It will get created into the database. Now the next thing is what we need to store the data inside the database. So for that, I have created one component called as a data loader. Okay, so you can go manually inside the database and you set the roles and username and password. But that password should be encoded. So for that, this is a better option. So what I did here, I have created one component, simple component, okay, and implement it from the command liner. And after this, I auto wire that repository, okay, user repository, and then I auto wire that password encoder, which we created into the configuration class. And here we have created the two users, my user admin is equal to new my user, and we set the username admin, password is equal to password, and that password should be encoded. Okay, so we are using this bean, so that is the use of that bean. So we are encoding that password and setting into database, and then roles called as admin, and we are saving this detail inside the database through the repository. Similarly, we have created another user called as user, whose username is user, password is password, and role is a user, and we stored into the database. So once application started, so at that time, this method will get called and it will store the data inside the database. Now, next thing is if you want to provide multiple roles to the user. Okay, so let's say this is user, and I want to provide here role like employee. Okay, then I can provide this rule. Okay, we don't need this thing. Okay, comma, only comma separated string. So you can provide multiple roles as well, because this attribute accepting the string. Okay, comma separated string. That's it. But right now I am providing here only user. So this is the data loader, and don't worry about the code. I given the GitHub link, so you can go to that GitHub link, or you can clone the code. Okay, so that's it. Now the next thing is, let's start the application. Okay, let's start the application. Now, when we start the application, that data will get loaded into the database. So let's start the application where it is. Okay, now you can see create table my user. That table is created. Okay, and that data is also inserted into the table. So let me show you into the table. So let me refresh. I can see user my underscore user table. View all, and you will see that data. Okay, ID 12, password is this encoded password. role is equal to admin user, okay, and username is equal to user and admin. That's it. Now our application is ready. So what we can do here, let's hit using the browser. Okay, let's hit using the browser. So which API that we want to hit? Controller, where it is, where controller? Okay, controller. Okay, so I want to hit this hello user. Okay, hello user. So in security config, what we did here, mm, where it is, okay, hello admin can accessible by only admin, not by the user. Now here we are going to log in with the user only. Okay, so let's hit first. Let's open the browser. Mm, and here http slash local host 8080, then slash hello user. Okay, hello user. And I can see it is showing the login page. So provide here username password. Let's say username is admin, no, not admin, user, and then password is password. Let's hit enter. And I can see we are able to access that welcome user. Okay, welcome user, or that user hello user API. Now let's try to access that another API called as a hello admin. It is showing 403. Why? 403 means unauthorized. That means that user is valid, but it is not giving the access to that admin API. So that is called as a unauthorized. And in that case, it is giving the 403. That is called as a forbidden. That's it. Now so let's try to access this same API. Okay, same API with that admin user. So let's open the incognito mode, paste here. Now you can see the login page. Okay, so user is admin and password is password. That's it, and sign in. Now you can see it is able to access that welcome admin. But let's revise the application once. So what we have created here, we have created the one my user entity. Okay, my user entity, in which there are fields username, password, roles. Roles are this comma separated string. Okay, comma separated string, because one user can have multiple roles. After this, what we needed, we need a repository to connect with database. The next thing is we have two APIs, hello user, hello admin. And in security config, okay, security config, we configure the security filter chain. And here we have given the URL slash hello admin should be accessible by only admin role. And for others, there is a authentication is applicable. Okay, any request authenticated. That's it. And we have defining here default form. Okay, if you want custom form, so in next video we will see that custom form login page. Don't worry about this. Apart from this, we need this URL detail service, and it is responsible for to fetch the data from the database. Okay, and we need a bean of password encoder, and this bean we are using into the data loader. Okay, data loader. So let me show you data loader. So this is the data loader where we provide the user information, or basically we store the data or user objects into the database. So this is all about the video, and if you want the code, so you can go to the description, you will get the link of this code. And apart from this, if you like, so please share and subscribe this channel. So another thing is, please do the comment, so I will get the motivation and I will create a new videos on the Spring Security. Thanks for watching my video.